Cain and Abel. Adam made love to his wife Eve, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. She said, "With the help of the Lord I have brought forth a man." Later she gave birth to his brother Abel. Now Abel kept flocks, and Cain worked the soil. In the course of time Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. And Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it." Now Cain said to his brother Abel, "Let's go out to the field." While they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" "I don't know," he replied. "Am I my brother's keeper?" The Lord said, "What have you done?" "Listen. Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth." Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is more than I can bear. Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." But the Lord said to him, "Not so. Anyone who kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over." Then the Lord put a mark on Cain so that no one who found him would kill him. So Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Cain made love to his wife, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Enoch. Cain was then building a city, and he named it after his son Enoch. To Enoch was born Irad, and Irad was the father of Mehujael, and Mehujael was the father of Methuselah, and Methuselah was the father of Lamech. Lamech married 2 women, one named Adah and the other Zillah. Adah gave birth to Jabal. He was the father of those who live in tents and raise livestock. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all who play stringed instruments and pipes. Zillah also had a son, Tubal-Cain, who forged all kinds of tools out of bronze and iron. Tubal-Cain's sister was Naamah. Lamech said to his wives, "Adah and Zillah, listen to me. Wives of Lamech, hear my words. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for injuring me. If Cain is avenged 7 times, then Lamech 77 times. Adam made love to his wife again, and she gave birth to a son and named him Seth, saying, God has granted me another child in place of Abel, since Cain killed him. Seth also had a son, and he named him Enosh. At that time people began to call on the name of the Lord. Adam made love to his wife Eve, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. She said, with the help of the Lord I have brought forth a man. Later she gave birth to his brother Abel. All right, let us delve into the profound depths of this single, yet monumentally significant, verse. To treat it superficially would be to miss the metaphysical bedrock it lays for the entire tragic drama that is about to unfold. Each clause is saturated with a meaning that reverberates through the subsequent narrative, not just of Cain and Abel, but of the entire human condition as conceptualized in the Judeo-Christian framework. Adam made love to his wife Eve. To begin, the phrase rendered in modern English as made love is, in the original Hebrew, yada, a verb of profound complexity. While it certainly encompasses the physical act of carnal union, to reduce it to mere biology would be a catastrophic error in interpretation. The root yada means to know, and its usage here implies an experiential, intimate, and deeply consequential form of knowledge. This is not the detached, objective knowledge of the scientist observing a phenomenon from a distance. It is a knowledge born of direct, embodied participation. It's the same root used to describe the knowledge of good and evil, a knowledge that wasn't merely intellectual but existentially transformative, tearing Adam and Eve from the undifferentiated paradise of Eden and casting them into the world of self-conscious, historical being. So, what does it mean that Adam knew his wife Eve? It signifies the first instance of a fully human, post-lapsarian sexual union, an act now freighted with the awesome and terrifying burden of self-awareness. This is no longer the unthinking, instinctual coupling of animals in a state of nature. It is an act undertaken by two beings who are acutely aware of their nakedness, their vulnerability, and their mortality. It is an act that is now inextricably linked with the concepts of choice, consequence, and the conscious confrontation with the fundamental forces of life and death. In knowing Eve, Adam is not merely engaging in a procreative act, he is participating in the perpetuation of this new, difficult, and tragic mode of existence. He is actively choosing to bring another being into this world of suffering and struggle, a world where the knowledge of good and evil necessitates constant vigilance and moral effort. The act itself is a microcosm of the human condition, a willful engagement with the chaotic, generative forces of nature, an attempt to bring order and meaning to the biological imperative through the lens of conscious relationship. It is an act of both profound intimacy and terrifying responsibility, a grappling with the divine and the bestial within the same singular event. And she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. The consequence of this knowing is immediate and world-altering, conception and birth. This is the first human birth in history, the first time a human being has emerged not from the direct, divine craftsmanship of God, but from the womb of a woman, from the crucible of biological process. This event marks a fundamental shift in the nature of creation. Humanity is now a self-perpetuating species, endowed with the godlike and terrifying capacity to generate new consciousness. The abstract potential for life, which was a gift in Eden, has now become an imminent, bloody, and painful reality. The birth of Cain is the ultimate manifestation of humanity's expulsion into the domain of nature and history. It is a process governed by the laws of biology, a process of pain and travail, as prefigured in the curse laid upon Eve in Genesis 3 verse 16, "In pain you shall bring forth children." This is the price of that experiential knowledge, the price of self-consciousness. The ideal has been made flesh, but the process is one of suffering. Cain's very existence is therefore predicated on this new reality. He is the firstborn of a fallen world, a being whose origins are rooted in a conscious act of procreation undertaken in the shadow of mortality. He is, in a sense, the first true human in the historical sense, a product of human will and human biology. And his life will be a testament to the challenges inherent in that condition. The naming of the child, Cain, Hebrew, Cain, is itself deeply significant. The name is etymologically linked to the Hebrew verb kana, which means to get, to acquire, or to create. It also carries connotations of craftsmanship, of forging, as one might forge a tool from metal. This name, given by Eve, will prove to be tragically ironic. Cain will become a tiller of the soil, one who works and shapes the earth. But this impulse to get and create will curdle within him into a possessive and ultimately destructive force. The very name encapsulates the dual potential of the human spirit, the capacity for productive, creative work, and the capacity for grasping, envious acquisition that can lead to murder. She said, "With the help of the Lord I have brought forth a man." Eve's utterance upon the birth of her son is one of the most theologically dense and psychologically revealing statements in the entire book of Genesis. On the surface, it appears to be a declaration of faith and gratitude, an acknowledgement that this incredible feat of bringing forth a new life was not accomplished through her power alone, but in partnership with the divine. She recognizes that despite the pain, despite the fall, the creative principle of the cosmos, the Logos, God, is still operative in the world. She has participated in a creative act that is fundamentally divine in its nature. It's a moment of profound awe, a recognition of the miracle of existence in the face of the suffering that her newfound knowledge has revealed. However, a deeper, more troubling layer of meaning lurks beneath the surface, particularly in the original Hebrew, Kanadi ish etyhwh. The translation, with the help of the Lord, is an interpretation. A more literal rendering could be, I have gotten a man with the Lord, or even, more radically, I have created a man, even as the Lord. There is an ambiguity here that is pregnant with peril. Is Eve expressing humble gratitude, or is there a hint of hubris in her words? Is she a grateful co-creator, or is she beginning to see herself as a rival creator, a being who, like God, can bring forth a man? This latter interpretation casts a dark shadow over Cain's birth. If Eve sees this child as her own great acquisition, her own creation to rival God's creation of Adam, then she is already investing in him a tremendous amount of ego and expectation. She has gotten him, acquired him. This places an unbearable archetypal weight upon the child. He is not just a child, he is the embodiment of his mother's creative power, perhaps even a tool for her to rectify her own fallen state. It speaks to the terrifying danger of parental projection, where a child is burdened with the unconscious ambitions and unfulfilled desires of the parent. Cain is born into a world where he is already an object of intense, and possibly hubristic, maternal focus. He is the man-child who is gotten, a possession, and this may be the very seed of the possessive rage that will later consume him. This statement, therefore, is a knife edge of meaning. It is both a testament to the miracle of co-creation with the divine and a terrible warning of the human tendency to usurp that divinity, to see the creative act as one of personal power and acquisition, thereby planting the seeds of future catastrophe. The verse begins with an act that is simultaneously the most commonplace of biological realities and the most profound of metaphysical events. The text states, Adam made love to his wife Eve. The standard English translation, sanitized and softened for modern sensibilities, catastrophically fails to capture the raw, existential gravity of the original Hebrew. The verb here is yada. It means to know. We must pause here. The entire weight of the post-Edenic world is packed into the selection of this single verb. This is not the abstract, detached knowledge of the intellect, the Greek episteme. This is knowledge gained through direct, embodied, experiential encounter. It is the same verb root used in the pivotal phrase describing the forbidden fruit from the tree of the knowledge, da'at. From the same root yada, of good and evil. That knowledge wasn't a list of ethical propositions, it was a fundamental transformation of consciousness. It was the knowing of their own nakedness, their vulnerability, their mortality, a knowledge that shattered the unself-conscious unity of paradise and plunged them into the brutal reality of duality, of history, of suffering. Therefore, when Adam knew Eve, it signifies the first sexual union undertaken within this new, terrifying framework of self-awareness. This is not the innocent coupling of creatures in a state of nature. This is an act performed by two beings who now understand what it means to be fragile, finite, and flawed. They are looking at each other not with the innocent eyes of Eden, but with the eyes of exiles who have seen the abyss. The act of love, of creation, is now forever intertwined with the knowledge of death. It is a conscious, willful decision to participate in the perpetuation of this new, difficult mode of being. It is an act of defiance against the void, perhaps, but also an act that accepts the tragic conditions of existence. In knowing his wife, Adam confronts the fundamental paradox of life itself. The generative, chaotic, life-giving force of nature is now filtered through the orderly, but burdened, lens of a consciousness that knows it must suffer and die. It is a microcosm of the human condition, a voluntary grappling with the awesome and terrible power of being. The consequence of this knowing is immediate and irreversible, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. This is the first human birth. This is the moment humanity is untethered from the direct, miraculous hand of divine craftsmanship and thrown into the churning, biological, historical process. Adam was sculpted from clay, a top-down creation of pure order. Eve was formed from Adam, a secondary, yet still miraculous, creation. But Cain comes from the womb. He comes from the blood and water, from the pain and the travail that was foretold in the curse upon Eve. He is the first man of history. History does not properly begin until there is a being who is born of other humans, a being who inherits not a pristine garden but a legacy. Cain is born into a world that is already fallen, already compromised. His initial environment is not the divine order of Eden, but the psychological order established by his parents, an order defined by shame, by toil, by the memory of loss, and by the knowledge of death. The universe, for Cain, is not a given, it is a problem to be solved, a reality to be contended with. His birth signifies the beginning of the great, bloody, and heroic tragic story of mankind's struggle through time. He is the prototype for every human being who has ever been born, emerging from the chaos of the womb into a world that is a mixture of potential and limitation, a world that did not ask for you and is not necessarily your friend. The name itself, Cain, is a key. As we noted, it is linked to the verb kana, meaning to get, to acquire, to forge. It is a name of action, of production, of making. It is the name of the creature who must now create his own value, forge his own way in a world that no longer provides for him spontaneously. It is the name of the technological man, the builder, the creator. But within this potential for creation lies its dark shadow, its inverse possibility, the potential for grasping, for possessiveness, for the belief that one can get and own reality itself. Cain is named not for what he is, but for the act of his acquisition. He is, from the outset, a project. This leads us to the final, and perhaps most terrifying, clause of the verse. Eve, in the throes of postpartum awe and agony, makes a declaration. She said, "With the help of the Lord I have brought forth a man." Again, this translation smooths over a dangerous and profound ambiguity in the Hebrew, Kanadi ish etyhwh. On one level, the charitable and pious interpretation, this is an expression of profound gratitude. Eve, the first mother, has participated in the miracle of life. She has looked into the face of her child and seen the image of God. The creative spirit of the Logos, still at work even in a fallen world. She acknowledges that her creative act is not performed in isolation but is a co-creation, a partnership with the fundamental structure of being, with God. She has brought forth a man with the Lord. This is the noble interpretation. It is the proper, humble, and grateful response to the miracle of birth. But there is another way to read it, a darker and more psychologically volatile way. The little word et can be read not just as with, but as a marker for the direct object of a verb. This would render the sentence, "I have gotten a man, the Lord." A third possibility, as we explored, is, "I have created a man, even as the Lord." It is by no means clear that Eve is being entirely humble. There is the chilling possibility of a profound hubris here, a statement of ultimate triumph. After being cast out, after being cursed, she has performed an act of creation that seems to rival God's own. He made a man, Adam. But I, Eve, have also made a man. In this reading, Eve's statement is the cry of the human spirit in its Promethean ambition, its desire to usurp the divine prerogative. She sees in her son not just a child, but her own magnificent accomplishment, her acquisition, her creation. Cain is not just a gift, he is her vindication. He is the project that will prove her own power and worth. In this moment, Cain the person is sublimated and replaced by Cain the idea, Cain the symbol of his mother's creative power. It is this ambiguity that is the true key. Eve is likely feeling both things at once. She is both a humble vessel for a divine miracle and a prideful creator glorying in her own power. This is the duality that lives in the heart of every parent, and indeed, every human being who creates anything. It is the tension between gratitude and ego. And it is this very tension, this unresolved psychic conflict, that is bequeathed to Cain as his primary inheritance. He is born of a knowing steeped in tragedy, and he is gotten in a moment of profound spiritual ambiguity. He is tasked, from his first breath, with embodying his mother's highest hopes and her most dangerous, hubristic ambitions. The stage is now perfectly set for a catastrophe of cosmic proportions. Later she gave birth to his brother Abel. Now Abel kept flocks, and Cain worked the soil. This second verse functions as a fulcrum. It pivots away from the initial, intense singularity of the first birth and establishes the primordial dichotomy that will structure all human conflict to come. We are presented with a second son, a second name, and a second way of being, and it is in the tension between the first and the second that the world breaks. Later she gave birth to his brother Abel. The word later is deceptively simple. It implies the passage of time in this new, historical reality. It implies that the initial, perhaps triumphant, experience of giving birth to Cain has now been subjected to the grinding reality of daily existence outside the walls of paradise. The toil for bread, the sweat of the brow, the anxieties of parenthood in a hostile world, all of this has worked its way into the soul of the first mother. The initial burst of creative, quasi-divine hubris has cooled. And into this cold reality, a second son is born. And his name is Abel. We must not, move past this name quickly. It is arguably the most tragically predictive naming in all of Western literature. Where Cain signifies acquisition, substance, the forging of something tangible, Abel means vapor, mist, breath, a puff of wind. It is the word that will later be used by the author of Ecclesiastes to summarize the entirety of the human condition under the sun: futility, vanity, transience. It is everything that cannot be grasped, everything that is impermanent. What does this tell us about the psychological transformation of Eve? It is a portrait of staggering disillusionment. The mother who held her firstborn and declared, "I have gotten a man," now holds her second and, in essence, declares, "He is but a fleeting breath." She has learned the terrible truth of the world into which she has been exiled. She has learned that what one gets, one can also lose. She has learned that life is fragile, that its substance is illusory, and that it ends. The joy of acquisition has been irrevocably tempered by the terror of finitude. And so, Abel is burdened from birth with a terrible kind of parental projection, one that is the inverse of Cain's. Cain is the project of permanence, the vessel of his mother's ambition. Abel is the project of transience, the vessel of her tragic wisdom and disillusionment. He is, by his very name, consecrated to the insubstantial. He is the walking, breathing embodiment of the uncomfortable truth that life is ephemeral, a truth that his older brother, the builder, the acquirer, the tiller of the solid earth, will be constitutionally incapable of accepting. Abel is the family's memento mori. His existence is a constant, quiet, and maddening whisper to his brother: all that you build, all that you acquire, is ultimately smoke. The verse then concludes by defining the existential paths of these two differently named souls. Now Abel kept flocks, and Cain worked the soil. These are not merely professions. To treat this as a simple sociological detail is an act of profound blindness. These are two fundamentally different, archetypal modes of being. They are the two primary strategies for confronting the chaos of existence and attempting to wrest order from it. First, there is Cain, the tiller of the soil. He is the agriculturalist. What does this mean, archetypally? It means he is the man who settles. He draws a line in the dirt and says, "This space is mine. This space I will control." He imposes a rigid, geometric order upon the chaotic face of nature. He builds fences, and by extension, walls. He is the proto-architect, the proto-engineer, the founder of the city. His entire existence is an investment in a fixed location and a predictable future. He toils now, delaying gratification, on the promise of a future harvest. His virtues are patience, methodical labor, and long-term planning. He represents the spirit of structure, of tradition, of civilization itself. But there is a terrible shadow to this mode of being. Because Cain has invested his entire identity in this plot of land. In this structure, he becomes pathologically attached to it. His security is predicated on the assumption that his plans will work, that the soil will yield its fruit in direct proportion to his labor. When it does not, when nature, in its inherent unpredictability, betrays his calculations with drought or blight, he has no recourse. His system has failed, and therefore he has failed. This breeds a deep, burning resentment against the very structure of reality for its unfairness. The settled man, when his settlement is threatened, becomes rigid, tyrannical, and murderously hostile to any alternative way of being that appears to be more successful. Then there is Abel, the keeper of flocks. He is the shepherd, the pastoralist. What does this represent? He is the man who does not settle. He is a nomad. He does not own the land, he traverses it. His wealth is not static and rooted, it is alive, breathing, and mobile. He cannot rely on walls or long-term, fixed plans. He must live in a state of constant, vigilant awareness. He must guide his living capital through the untamed wilderness, responding in real time to threats, predators, storms, the lack of water. He lives perpetually on the boundary between order, his flock, and chaos, the wilderness. His virtues are necessarily different from Cain's. They are courage, adaptability, vigilance, and a kind of dynamic faith. He must trust that a new pasture lies over the next hill. His relationship with being, with God, is therefore more immediate. He is not buffered from the harsh realities of nature by the walls of a city or the promise of a granary. He lives in a state of managed crisis, and his survival is a testament to his ability to successfully navigate the unknown. He represents the spirit of exploration, of adaptability, of the adventurer who renews the culture by bringing back information from the frontier. Here, then, the tragic conflict is set. It is the eternal conflict between the settled city and the nomadic adventurer, between the conservative impulse to fortify the existing structure and the revolutionary impulse to explore what lies beyond it. Cain, the man of order, structure, and territory, looks at his brother, Abel, the man of mobile faith and adaptability. And when the structure of reality itself, when God appears to favor the adaptable man of faith over the hard-working man of the soil, the settled man's resentment will curdle into a hatred so profound that it will seek to annihilate the very ideal that has judged him. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. And Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. Here we arrive at the heart of the matter. The narrative now moves from the establishment of the two archetypal brothers to the crucial test of their character, their orientation towards the transcendent, their relationship with the fundamental structure of being, which is expressed through the primordial act of sacrifice. To understand what happens next, we must first dare to understand the metaphysics of sacrifice itself, for it is arguably the single most important and most misunderstood concept in the history of human consciousness. What is sacrifice? At its most profound level, sacrifice is the very grammar of meaningful existence. It is the voluntary recognition that the present must be offered up for the sake of a better future. This is not some arbitrary religious convention. It is a discovery about the nature of reality so fundamental that it is embedded in the neurochemistry of our being. The ability to delay gratification, to forego a present impulse for a future reward, is the cornerstone of all higher-order consciousness and all successful human enterprise. Point 7. It is the farmer saving his best seed corn for the next planting rather than consuming it now. It is the student foregoing leisure to study for an examination. It is the parents sacrificing their own comfort for the well-being of their child. It is the very structure of civilization. Sacrifice is predicated on a terrifyingly optimistic idea that reality is structured in such a way that it rewards this behavior. It is a wager, an act of faith, that there is a benevolent or at least predictable order to the cosmos, a logos, that responds favorably to sincere, voluntary offerings of value. To sacrifice is to act as if being is good, as if the future can be made better than the present through our own willed action. It is the fundamental antidote to the nihilistic despair that arises from the perception of life's inherent suffering. Yes, the sacrificer says, life is suffering. But I can make a voluntary offering of my present suffering, my present value, to aim at something higher, and there is a power in the universe that will reward that aim. This act is therefore the ultimate differentiator between man and beast. An animal is pure present tense impulse. A man, a conscious being, lives in the tension between past, present, and future. He is burdened by the memory of the past, the fall, his own inadequacies, and plagued by anxiety for the future. The act of sacrifice is how he negotiates this temporal trap. He takes something of value that he possesses now, his time, his resources, his energy, his best creations, and offers it up to the ideal that he has formulated for a better future, symbolized here as an offering to the Lord. The quality of that offering, therefore, is a perfect reflection of the quality of the individual soul, the sincerity of their aim, and the accuracy of their perception of reality. With this understanding, let us turn to Cain. The text says, in the course of time Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering. The opening phrase itself is laden with a weary and ominous significance. In the course of time, Miketz Yamim, suggests the passage of seasons, the establishment of a routine. This does not sound like a spontaneous upwelling of gratitude or awe. It has the feeling of a grudging obligation, a tax to be paid, a ritual to be performed because it is expected. The fire of genuine religious sentiment seems to have already burned low, replaced by the cold ashes of duty. But it is the nature of the offering itself that reveals the full depth of the pathology. He brought some of the fruits of the soil. The utter vagueness of this description is the entire point. The rabbinic commentators, in their profound psychological wisdom, often elaborated on this, suggesting Cain brought the leftovers. The flax seed, the inferior produce that he himself did not want. 8. The text, in its pristine archetypal form, leaves it vague because the precise object is irrelevant. What is relevant is what is not said. It is not the first fruits. It is not the choicest fruits. It is not the best of his labor. It is merely some. This is the sacrifice of the inauthentic man. It is the offering of a soul riddled with resentment, a soul that wants the reward of sacrifice without the pain of genuine surrender. It is a calculated, minimalist transaction. Cain is essentially asking, what is the absolute least I can give up to satisfy the technical requirements of this cosmic bargain? He is attempting to deceive the structure of being itself. He holds back the best for himself, offering God the leftovers, while still expecting the full dividend of divine favor. This is a manifestation of profound contempt, contempt for the divine, and more deeply, contempt for himself, for he is acting in a way that he knows to be second-rate. He is a man divided, performing an action his highest conscience cannot endorse. This offering, this mincha, is not a gift, it is a bride, and a cheap one at that. Now, contrast this with Abel. The difference in the description is a chasm of metaphysical significance. And Abel, he also brought. The Hebrew construction suggests an intensification, as if to say, Abel, for his part. He brought from the firstborn of his flock and from their fat portions. Every word here is crucial and must be unpacked. He brings from the Bekor, the firstborn, 9 in the entire symbolic economy of the ancient world. The firstborn was the most precious. It represented the beginning of all future wealth, the continuation of the line, the promise of tomorrow. To sacrifice the firstborn is to sacrifice the future. It is an act of supreme faith. It is to say, I will give up the very source of my future security and trust that being is sufficiently benevolent and ordered that my sacrifice will not lead to ruin, but to renewal. It is the polar opposite of Cain's holding back. It is a total, forward-looking surrender of what is most valued. Furthermore, he brings of their chelav, their fat portions. 10 The fat was considered the very essence of life, the richest and most energy-laden part of the animal. 11 In the later Levitical code, the fat of a sacrifice is almost always explicitly reserved for God alone. It symbolizes the offering of the absolute best, the richest part, the essence. Abel does not bring a scrawny, second-rate animal. He brings the prime specimen, the first and the best, and from that prime specimen, he offers the most precious and vital part. Abel's sacrifice is therefore total, genuine, and wholehearted. It is the offering of an integrated soul, a man whose actions are in full alignment with his highest aim. He is not performing a resentful calculation. He is engaged in a sincere and courageous act of worship, offering the absolute best of what he has to the highest good he can conceive. He is acting out the proposition that if one is to engage with reality, one must do so completely and with the best one has to offer. The consequence is immediate and inexorable. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. It is a catastrophic error to read this as the whimsical, arbitrary choice of a capricious sky god. Such a reading makes God a tyrant and Cain a victim, which is the very conclusion that Cain himself will reach. No, the text is far more profound than that. The Lord, in this context, can be understood as a metaphor for the unyielding structure of reality itself. God is the name we give to the principle that governs the consequences of our actions. The story is communicating a terrifyingly deep truth. You cannot lie to reality. The universe is structured in such a way that genuine, courageous, wholehearted effort is looked upon with favor, that is to say, it tends to be productive. It aligns with the grain of being and is therefore more likely to succeed. Conversely, resentful, partial, deceitful, and half-hearted effort is not looked upon with favor, that is to say, it tends to fail. The world does not reward it. Cain's sacrifice was a lie, and reality simply reflected its untruthfulness back at him. The rejection was not a punishment inflicted from the outside, it was the inevitable outcome of the nature of his own offering. It was a piece of feedback from the universe. And what is Cain's response to this feedback? Does he engage in introspection? Does he ask, "What did I do wrong? My brother's sacrifice was accepted. What was the difference in our approach? How can I improve my aim? How can I make my offering more genuine?" No. That would be the path of wisdom, the path of redemption. Instead, the text tells us, so Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. Here, in this simple description, is the psychological birth of hell. The anger is not directed inward at his own inadequacy. It is directed outward, at his brother for being the successful ideal, and more fundamentally, at God, at the structure of being itself for being constituted in a way that rewards genuineness and rejects his deceit. He is angry that the universe is moral. His downcast face, his fallen countenance, ve'epilapanav, is the physical posture of a soul turning towards the abyss. It is the beginning of the meditation on revenge, the germination of the idea that if the structure of being has judged him inadequate, then the proper response is not to improve himself, but to attack the structure of being. And that is a murderous thought. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it." Here, the narrative shifts from third-person observation to direct divine discourse. We must understand what this represents archetypally. The Lord speaking is the intrusion of the Logos, the principle of divine order, meaning, and consciousness, into the chaotic, resentful, and increasingly disordered psyche of Cain. This is the voice of conscience. It is the voice of that part of the self that remains uncorrupted, the part that can still observe its own pathological state from a distance. It is the last-ditch effort of being to offer a path to redemption before the abyss becomes inescapable. This is not an external conversation with an old man in the sky. It is the ultimate internal monologue, a dialogue between the ego, twisted by resentment, and the transcendent self that still has access to the truth. The dialogue opens with two questions of devastating simplicity and penetration. Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? We should not be so naive as to assume that the omniscient principle of being is asking for information it does not possess. These are not questions of ignorance. They are the questions of a master therapist, a spiritual surgeon. They are Socratic in their intent, designed to force the subject, Cain, into a state of self-reflection that is the absolute antithesis of his current resentful preoccupation. Why are you angry? The Logos is demanding an articulation. It is challenging Cain to bring his raw, chaotic, murderous emotion into the domain of language and reason. The demand is, essentially, justify your rage. Formulate a coherent argument for this anger that is consuming you. This is a profound psychological technique. Often, the articulation of a dark emotion exposes its own irrationality. To say aloud, "I am angry because reality rewarded my brother's genuine sacrifice and rejected my own half-hearted, deceitful one," is to state the truth in a manner that makes the anger untenable. But Cain will not do this. He remains silent, stewing in the unarticulated darkness, because the darkness is more gratifying than the painful light of self-examination. Why is your face downcast? This second question is equally profound. The Logos directs Cain's attention to the physical manifestation of his spiritual sickness. Look at yourself, Cain. Your inner state of resentment and malevolence is not a private affair. It is warping your very being. It is written on your body. Your face has fallen, Ve'apalapanov. You are physically embodying the descent into the underworld. Do you not see this? Do you not understand that your soul is dragging your body down into the posture of hell? It is a call to self-awareness, to recognize the psychosomatic unity of being, and to see that a corrupted spirit will inevitably generate a corrupted and fallen form. What follows is perhaps the clearest articulation of the central moral choice facing humanity in the entire biblical corpus. The Logos lays out the two paths, the binary choice that is perpetually available to conscious beings. First, the path of redemption. If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? The Hebrew for do what is right, teted, implies more than just following rules. It suggests making things good, acting in a pleasing and proper manner, aiming correctly. And the word for accepted, set, is stunning in its symbolic resonance. It literally means to lift up, to exalt. It is the direct physical and spiritual antidote to his downcast, fallen face. The Logos is presenting a causal relationship of profound optimism. The feedback you received was not a final judgment on your character, but an assessment of your last action. The future is not closed to you. If you correct your aim, if you choose to act properly and make a genuine sacrifice, reality itself will lift you up. You can reverse this fallen state. The path to ascension is available to you right now. All it requires is a voluntary change in your orientation towards being. This is an incredible statement of hope, freedom, and personal responsibility. Cain is not fated to damnation. He is being explicitly handed the key to his own salvation. But then comes the alternative. The voice of the Logos, having presented the path to heaven, must also illuminate the path to hell. But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. This is one of the most psychologically terrifying passages ever written. Sin, chat-tat, is not described here as an abstract concept or a mere transgression. It is personified. It is given life. It is depicted as a predator, a great cat, a monstrous beast of prey. The verb crouching, ravitz, is the verb used to describe a predator coiled to strike, lying in ambush at a watering hole. The image is precise and visceral. At the very threshold of your consciousness, at the door of your soul, there lies in wait a predatory entity. And what does this predator want? The text is explicit. It desires to have you. The word for desire is teshukah, a word implying a powerful, consuming longing. The same word is used of Eve's desire for Adam. This is not a passive threat. It is an active, malevolent force that wants to possess you. It wants to take over the household of your soul and become your master. This is the archetypal description of ideological possession, of what happens when a resentful narrative takes hold of an individual. That narrative, that sin, ceases to be a mere set of ideas and becomes an autonomous psychic entity that directs the host's perceptions, thoughts, and actions towards its own destructive ends. Yet, even in the face of this terrifying reality, the Logos does not abandon Cain to the beast. The final clause is the ultimate call to heroic consciousness, but you must rule over it. Vieta Timshalbo. The responsibility is not abrogated. The possibility of dominion is not removed. The Logos is saying, yes, the predator is real. Yes, it is at your door. Yes, it desires to consume you, but you are not its helpless prey. Within you is the capacity to become its master. The responsibility is absolute, individual, and non-negotiable. It is the defining burden and glory of human consciousness. The choice is laid bare with horrifying clarity. You can align yourself with the good and be lifted up, or you can fail to do so and be devoured by the beast you refuse to rule. The entire fate of the world hangs on this choice, inside this one man. Now Cain said to his brother Abel, "Let's go out to the field." While they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. This verse unfolds with the stark, inexorable logic of a Greek tragedy. Every phrase is a step deeper into the abyss, a deliberate act of will that transforms a private, internal hell into a world-altering, historical catastrophe. We must analyze this sequence with extreme care, for it is the blueprint for the translation of resentful thought into genocidal action. The first clause is devastating in its implications. Now Cain said to his brother Abel. The significance lies first in what is absent. There is no reply to God. The Logos extended an offer of redemption, a call to consciousness, a path to being lifted up. Cain's response is to ignore it completely. This is not mere oversight. It is a conscious act of refusal. It is the slamming of the door on the voice of conscience. Cain has listened to the deepest wisdom of the cosmos and has decided, no. He has chosen the crouching predator. He has chosen his resentment over the possibility of his own redemption. This is a moment of absolute spiritual treason. Having rejected the divine word, Cain now co-opts language for his own malevolent purpose. He speaks to his brother, Abel. And what does he say? The standard Hebrew text is starkly silent on the content, simply stating, "And Cain said to Abel his brother," before describing the murder. This silence itself is profound, suggesting a gap, a void of meaning between them. But venerable ancient translations like the Septuagint and the Samaritan Pentateuch supply the missing words, words that are psychologically necessary for the story to make sense. Let us go out to the field. This phrase is a masterpiece of predatory deception. It is cloaked in the guise of fraternity, an invitation to shared activity. But it is a lie. It is the weaponization of language, turning the tool of communion into a lure for an ambush. The field is critically important. It is a space away from the altar of sacrifice, away from whatever nascent social order might exist around the family dwelling. It is a liminal space, a place where the rules can be suspended. It is a deliberate movement from a zone of relative order into a zone of higher chaos, a location consciously selected for the crime. The rabbinic tradition, in its deep psychological insight, often imagined that a great philosophical debate occurred on the way to the field or in the field itself. They imagined Cain, consumed by his nihilistic resentment, arguing that there is no justice, no divine judge, no reward for righteousness. Abel, the man of faith, would have defended the goodness of being. In this imagined dialogue, Cain loses the argument. His worldview, when exposed to the faith and reason of his brother, is shown to be bankrupt. And it is at the moment that his intellectual position collapses, the moment he is defeated by the Logos spoken through his brother, that he resorts to the final, irrefutable argument of the tyrant, physical force. When your ideas are revealed as hollow, you kill the man who speaks the truth. You don't eliminate the argument, you eliminate the arguer. While they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. The prose is brutally simple, stripped of all ornament. It reports the act with the cold, hard finality of a coroner. This is the moment the disease escapes the host and infects the world. The inner corruption of Cain's soul, his rage, his resentment, his metaphysical rebellion, now spills forth and permanently stains the earth. We must be absolutely clear about what this act represents. This is not a common murder born of passion or greed. Cain does not kill Abel to steal his flocks. He kills Abel to destroy the ideal. Abel is the living, breathing embodiment of a reality that Cain cannot tolerate. Abel is the man whose sacrifices are accepted. He is the man who lives in a proper relationship with God, who walks with the grace of one whose aim is true. Abel's very existence is an intolerable judgment upon Cain's fallen state. As long as Abel lives, Cain is confronted with the undeniable truth of his own inadequacy, his own malevolence, his own failed approach to life. Cain's act is therefore a metaphysical murder. It is driven by a form of terrible, magical thinking. The world has judged me as inferior to my brother. The structure of being has revealed my flaws and his virtues. If I can physically eliminate the ideal that judges me, then I can eliminate the judgment itself. It is an attempt to rewrite reality by destroying the evidence that contradicts one's chosen, resentful narrative. This is the UR pattern for all the great atrocities of history. It is the spirit of the totalitarian regime that burns the books and slaughters the intellectuals. It is the spirit of the ideologue who must exterminate the other, because their very existence is a refutation of his twisted worldview. It is the ultimate act of resentment against being. If the world does not conform to my will, if it does not validate my wretchedness, then I will unmake the world, starting with its best representative. This is the first human death recorded in the Bible, and it is a fratricide. The lesson is terrifying. The greatest threat to mankind is not nature, not floods or famines or wild beasts. The greatest threat to mankind is mankind itself. More specifically, the greatest threat to the good man, Abel, is the resentful man who has rejected the voice of conscience and embraced a nihilistic ideology, Cain. With this single act of violence, Cain has not only murdered his brother, he has fundamentally corrupted his relationship with reality. He, the tiller of the soil, has drenched the very soil he was meant to cultivate with the innocent blood of the ideal. He has poisoned his own ground. The world can no longer be a place of potential sustenance for him. It must now, and forever, be a place that cries out with the memory of his crime. He sought to eliminate a judgment against him, but has instead succeeded only in making that judgment permanent and inescapable. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" "I don't know," he replied. "Am I my brother's keeper?" Here, the voice of the Logos returns. Cain has just perpetrated the ultimate act of rebellion against the moral order, and the moral order now speaks back to him. The silence that followed his rejection of God's initial warning is now broken by a divine inquiry. This is the post-mortem, the audit of the soul after it has committed itself fully to the path of destruction. This dialogue reveals the psychological state of the murderer after the fact, and in Cain's reply, we are given the manifesto of hell itself. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" The question is deceptively simple, yet it is bottomless. As before, we must understand that an omniscient principle is not asking for locational information. This is not the question of a confused parent looking for a lost child. This is the question of the cosmos taking stock of a newly created void. It is a demand for an accounting. On the most direct level, it is a call to confront the concrete reality of the crime. Look at what you have done, Cain. There is an absence now where there was once a presence. There is a man missing. The set of existing things has been violently altered by your hand. Acknowledge it. It is designed to shatter the dissociative state that often follows a horrific act, to force the perpetrator to face the bold and brutal fact of his deed. On a deeper, metaphysical level, the question is far more profound. Abel, as we have established, represents the ideal. He is the man who walks in proper accord with being. So the question, "Where is your brother Abel?" is also asking, where is the ideal now, Cain? Where is the noble part of humanity? Where is the exemplar you were meant to emulate and live alongside? What have you done with the better part of your own potential, which he mirrored back to you? It is a question about the desecration of value. The structure of being is constituted by a hierarchy of value, and you have just committed the ultimate act of inversion. You have physically annihilated a higher value out of resentment for its very existence. The cosmos has become a poorer place because of you, and it is now demanding that you account for the diminishment. This question establishes the fundamental principle of cosmic accountability. No act of value destruction goes unnoticed by the structure of reality. Cain's response comes in two parts, each more monstrous than the last. His first utterance is a lie, "I don't know." Let us plumb the depths of this denial. Having just murdered his brother, Cain now attempts to murder reality itself with his words. This lie is the desperate, pathetic attempt to construct an alternative universe in which the crime did not occur, or at least, in which his agency in it is erased. It is the voice of pure, cowardly evasion. This sequence from resentment, to violence, to deceit is a classic psychological pattern. The resentment builds the justification, the violence enacts the rebellion, and the lie attempts to paper over the catastrophic consequences, to insulate the perpetrator from the reality he himself has just created. It is the voice of the totalitarian minister denying the existence of the concentration camps. It is the voice of the criminal telling the jury, "I wasn't there." It is the ultimate refusal to integrate the shadow. Cain has committed an act so foul that he cannot even admit it to the principle of being itself, which is tantamount to being unable to admit it to the deepest part of his own consciousness. He has become a stranger to the truth of his own life. This lie is the sound of a soul sealing itself shut, choosing the comfort of a self-serving falsehood over the terrible, but potentially redemptive, pain of the truth. If the lie was cowardly, what comes next is an act of astonishing, malevolent arrogance. Having failed to deceive God, Cain pivots to a new strategy. He attacks the very premise of the question. He sneers back at the logos with a rhetorical question of his own, a question that has echoed through the millennia as the ultimate expression of cynical, sociopathic individualism. Am I my brother's keeper? This is Cain's true confession. This is his philosophy. The lie, "I don't know," was a denial of fact. This question is a denial of all value, all connection, all responsibility. The Hebrew word for keeper is shomer, which means a guardian, a protector, a watchman. Cain is not just asking if he is responsible, he is mocking the very idea of moral duty. His question is dripping with contempt. It implies, "Why would you even imagine that the fate of another being is my concern? His existence, his non-existence, what is that to me? I am the center of my own universe, and I am not obligated to serve as the guardian of another." This is the articulation of the anti-ethic. It is the foundational creed of the abyss. If the moral law that will later thunder from Sinai is built upon the premise of responsibility for the other, for the widow, the orphan, the stranger, Cain's question is the attempt to preemptively annihilate that entire moral structure. It is the philosophical justification for his crime. He is arguing, post facto, that he lives in a universe where killing his brother is not a transgression because the category of transgression against another has no meaning. This is the end point of resentment. It begins with the feeling of being unfairly judged by the success of the ideal. It progresses to the destruction of that ideal. And it culminates in the articulation of a philosophy that justifies the destruction by denying the existence of any bond between beings. It is the lonely, miserable, and ultimately self-devouring worldview of a soul that has declared war on the interconnected nature of reality itself. Cain asks this question as if the answer is obviously no. But the entire moral weight of the biblical narrative, and indeed of civilization itself, is predicated on the terrifying and demanding proposition that the answer is yes. Yes, you are your brother's keeper. And in your failure to be his keeper, you became his murderer. The Lord said, "What have you done? Listen. Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth, too." Here, the Logos speaks again, not with the questioning tone of a therapist seeking to elicit self-awareness, but with the voice of judgment, which is to say, the voice of inescapable reality. Cain has made his move on the cosmic chessboard, and now the board itself reconfigures around him in a new and terrible pattern. The curse that is pronounced is not an arbitrary punishment inflicted from without, but rather the most articulate possible description of the inner and outer state that is the natural consequence of his actions. The divine response begins with an exclamation of horror that is also a final, damning accusation. "What have you done?" This is no longer a question inviting introspection, but a rhetorical cry that attempts to encompass the sheer magnitude of the transgression. It is the voice of being recoiling from the monstrousness of the deed. Cain's lie and his cynical deflection are swept aside, and he is confronted with the bare fact of his actions. Then comes one of the most powerful and symbolically dense phrases in all of Scripture. Listen. Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. This is a metaphysical principle of the highest order. The first lesson here is that you cannot silence injustice. You can murder the man, but you cannot murder the memory of the man or the fact of the crime. The act itself leaves an indelible trace, a permanent vibration in the fabric of existence. The blood, the damim in Hebrew, a plural form suggesting the fullness of life, all the life force that was shed, is personified. It is given a voice, and that voice cries out, soakim, a verb implying a primal scream for vindication, for justice. This is the archetypal idea that truth will out, that the universe itself has a moral texture and that a tear in that texture will not go unheard. The second lesson lies in the location of the cry. From the ground. The Adamah, the very earth from which the first man was named and which Cain the agriculturalist chose as his domain, has now become his primary accuser. He did not merely kill his brother, he forced the earth itself to participate in his crime. The subsequent verse makes this even more explicit, with the horrifying image of the ground opening its mouth to receive the blood. Nature, which was meant to be the source of his sustenance, has been violated, force-fed the life of his innocent brother. It has been transformed from a partner in cultivation into a horrified witness, a co-victim that will now bear an eternal grudge. Cain has poisoned his own field of being. The pronouncement that follows, "Now you are under a curse," is a formal declaration of Cain's new existential status. The curse has two primary components, each a precise and poetic consequence of his crime. First, he is driven from the ground. Cain is the man of the soil, the settled man, the builder whose entire identity and security are predicated on his relationship with a fixed territory. This curse is a fundamental shattering of that identity. He is excommunicated from his own element. The very thing he sought to master has now rejected him. By refusing to be his brother's keeper, he has forfeited his own place. By violating the bond of human community, he has been stripped of his connection to the natural world. This establishes a profound link between ethical behavior and one's relationship with the environment. To act with malevolence towards man is to create a state of alienation from nature itself. Second, the productivity of his life ceases. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. This is far more than an agricultural inconvenience. It is a metaphor for a life of sterile, meaningless effort. Cain, who refused to make a proper, wholehearted sacrifice, is now condemned to a life where no amount of work will bear fruit. When you murder the ideal, when you declare war on the principle of value itself, you destroy your own capacity for productive, meaningful action. Your labor becomes pointless, your projects turn to dust, because you have poisoned the spiritual soil from which all genuine growth springs. This is the curse of the nihilist, to be trapped in a world that he himself has rendered meaningless, to toil endlessly in a field that he has salted with the blood of the good. The curse culminates in a single, devastating summary of Cain's new mode of being: you will be a restless wanderer on the earth. The Hebrew phrase, navi nad, is almost an incantation, a rhyming couplet that evokes a state of constant, agitated, aimless motion. He is not to be an explorer, like an Abraham who is called to a destination. He is not a pilgrim on a sacred journey. He is a fugitive. This is the description of existential homelessness. Having severed his vertical connection to the divine through his refusal to sacrifice properly, and his horizontal connection to humanity through the murder of his brother, Cain is left with no coordinates, no anchor point in the cosmos. He is pure, untethered, anxious motion. He is condemned to wander because he has no place to be. A place is defined by a web of relationships and responsibilities, the very web that Cain has contemptuously torn apart. This is the ultimate consequence of his cynical creed. In declaring he was not his brother's keeper, he has annihilated the possibility of a home for himself. For a home is not merely a physical shelter, it is a space made meaningful by mutual care and obligation. By choosing a philosophy of absolute, atomized individualism, he has sentenced himself to a life of absolute, terrifying alienation. This state of being navi nad, a restless wanderer on the face of the earth, is the Bible's first and perhaps most terrifyingly accurate portrait of a soul in hell. Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is more than I can bear. Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." Cain speaks to God once more. The tone is utterly transformed. The sneering contempt of, "Am I my brother's keeper?" has evaporated, replaced by the whine of a crushed ego. Here we witness the collapse of the narcissistic fantasy. The man who thought he could rewrite the rules of being by murdering the ideal now confronts the ironclad nature of those rules, and he breaks himself against them. His speech is a cry from the depths of the hell he has meticulously constructed for himself. Cain's first utterance is, "My punishment is more than I can bear." We must pause here, for the original Hebrew, gadol avoni minso, contains a profound and troubling ambiguity that is central to understanding Cain's spiritual state. The most common translation, as rendered above, presents this as a statement of despair focused on the punishment. In this reading, Cain is engaging in an act of supreme self-pity. Notice what he does not say. He does not say, "My sin is terrible, I have done a monstrous thing." He does not mention Abel. His brother's name does not pass his lips. His entire focus is on the consequences to himself. The weight of his own future suffering is the only thing that occupies his mind. This is the cry of the narcissist who, having driven his car off a cliff in a drunken stupor, laments only the loss of his vehicle and the pain of his own injuries, without a thought for the passengers he has killed. It is regret, to be sure, but it is the regret of the captured criminal, not the remorse of the penitent sinner. He has been defeated by reality, and he despises his defeat. However, there is a second, equally plausible translation of the Hebrew, one that has been debated by commentators for centuries. The phrase can be read not as a statement, but as a question, and the word avon can be translated not merely as punishment, but as iniquity or perversity. In this light, Cain might be asking, is my iniquity too great to be forgiven? This reading opens a sliver of possibility for a moral dawning. It suggests that Cain might be, for the first time, grappling not just with the practical consequences, but with the metaphysical stain of his sin. He is looking at the blackness of his own soul and asking the terrifying question of whether such an act places one forever beyond the pale of redemption. Which is it? Psychologically, it is most likely both, in a terrible admixture. It is primarily a cry of self-pity for the unbearable weight of his punishment. But within that selfish despair, the horrifying nature of his iniquity, the avon, the intrinsic evil of the act itself, is beginning to dawn on him as the cause of that punishment. He is not yet capable of true repentance, which would involve mourning for the victim, but he is having his first, crushing lesson in the causal link between profound evil and profound suffering. He is a man collapsing under a burden, and only now beginning to dimly perceive that the burden is not an external imposition, but the weight of his own malevolent heart. Cain then proceeds to itemize his curse, demonstrating with chilling clarity that he now fully understands the multidimensional nature of his damnation. He repeats the terms of his sentence back to God, not as a defiant complaint, but as a terrified confirmation of his new reality. First, alienation from nature and sustenance. Today you are driving me from the land. He acknowledges the severance from the Adamah, the soil. He, the tiller, is now divorced from the earth. His life's work, his very identity, has been rendered null and void. Second, alienation from God, and I will be hidden from your presence. This is a moment of profound spiritual insight born of terror. Cain now understands that his crime was not just against Abel, but against the cosmic order. To be hidden from God's face is to be cast out of the realm of meaning, to live in a universe stripped of the logos, a universe without a divine organizing principle. It is the existential dread of realizing that one's actions have rendered life itself a hollow absurdity. Third, existential homelessness. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth. He internalizes the curse of being na-vi-nad. He grasps the horror of a future of endless, anxious, aimless motion. He accepts that he has forfeited his right to a place, to a home, to any sense of belonging. Finally, he adds a fourth dimension, a fear born of his own cynical logic, and whoever finds me will kill me. This is not part of God's original curse. It is Cain's own terrified deduction. It is the logical consequence of the philosophy he himself espoused. In declaring, "Am I my brother's keeper?" he tore a hole in the fabric of the social contract. He now realizes, with dawning horror, that he must live in the world he has created, a world where no one is their brother's keeper, and therefore, no one will be his. If human life has no intrinsic value, then his life has no intrinsic value. He is terrified that others will treat him with the same malevolent disregard with which he treated Abel. He has unleashed the cycle of vengeance upon the world, and he rightly expects to become its next victim. The man who refused to be a guardian now sees an avenger behind every rock. But the Lord said to him, "Not so. Anyone who kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over." Then the Lord put a mark on Cain so that no one who found him would kill him. Just when the logic of the narrative seems to point towards a swift and brutal end for Cain, the divine principle intervenes in a manner that is profoundly counterintuitive. This verse is not a simple addendum to the story. It is a radical re-engineering of the moral cosmos. It addresses the cycle of violence that Cain has unleashed and proposes a solution that is anything but simple. To understand this passage is to grapple with the tension between justice and mercy, and to witness the birth of a new and difficult form of social order. Cain's fear is perfectly rational. He has committed the ultimate transgression and expects the ultimate retribution, an eye for an eye. The response from the Logos, however, is an emphatic negation of this primitive logic. Not so. Lacan. This is a divine rejection of the cycle of blood feud. God's response indicates that the solution to the first murder cannot be a second murder, even if that second murder appears to be an act of justice. Why? Because to kill Cain out of vengeance would be to adopt Cain's own core belief that violence is the appropriate tool for rectifying a grievance. It would be to become Cain. The divine decree, anyone who kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over, is the establishment of a higher, transcendent law that supersedes the logic of personal retribution. It is a terrifying and absolute prohibition. God is effectively claiming a monopoly on ultimate justice. He is inserting a divine buffer into the endless cycle of human violence, declaring that the fate of the murderer belongs to a higher authority, not to the hands of the mob or the victim's kin. This is a foundational step in the agonizingly slow process of building a civilization. It is the first movement away from the law of the jungle and towards a system where even the most reviled criminal is protected from summary execution, subject instead to a higher, more abstract, and less passionate form of judgment. The nature of the vengeance, 7 times over, is deeply symbolic. The number 7 in Hebrew thought represents perfection, completion, and divine fullness. A 7-fold vengeance is therefore not just a greater punishment, it is a perfect and catastrophic consequence. It is a divine hyperbole designed as the ultimate deterrent. It places a terrible taboo around Cain, making him untouchable not out of any merit of his own, but out of a shared fear of unleashing a cosmic-level retribution. He is to be preserved, not for his own sake, but for the sake of the new law that his crime has necessitated. To enforce this new prohibition, the narrative tells us, then the Lord put a mark on Cain. The Hebrew word is boti, which simply means a sign, a token, or a symbol. It is the same word used for the rainbow as the boti of the covenant with Noah. This ambiguity has led to centuries of speculation, much of it unfortunately simplistic. The mark of Cain is not necessarily a physical brand of shame on his forehead. A scarlet letter for the first murderer. The text's refusal to specify the nature of the sign forces us to consider its deeper, symbolic function. What, then, is this mark? Let us consider the possibilities. It could be a physical sign, a visible alteration that immediately identifies him and warns others away. But this seems psychologically superficial. A more profound interpretation is that the mark was not a sign on Cain for others to see, but a sign given to Cain to reassure him of the divine promise of protection. It was a token to alleviate his terror. Perhaps the most psychologically astute interpretation, however, is that the mark was not a separate sign at all, but was Cain's cursed state itself. The mark was the visible manifestation of his inner torment. The mark was his restless wandering, his inability to find peace, his downcast face, the aura of profound misery and spiritual desolation that clung to him like a shroud. In this view, his punishment is his protection. People would encounter this man, so clearly shattered and haunted by the consequences of his actions, and would recoil not in violent rage, but in a kind of horrified awe. They would see in him not an object for vengeance, but a living cautionary tale, a walking monument to the effects of a soul that has murdered its own ideal. His very being becomes the warning sign. The brilliance of the mark of Cain lies in its paradoxical nature. It is simultaneously a mark of his crime and a mark of his protection. It is a sign of his utter alienation from the human community, and at the same time, the very thing that preserves his place within it, albeit as its first and most terrifying outcast. He is set apart, branded as other, yet he is not destroyed. He must be allowed to live out the full course of his punishment, to wander the earth as a living testament to two foundational principles. First, the catastrophic consequences of murdering the good, and second, the divine prohibition against solving evil with more evil. Cain is preserved, in his misery, as the first lesson in the terrible complexity of justice. So Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Cain made love to his wife, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Enoch. Cain was then building a city, and he named one after his son Enoch. In this sparse narrative, we are shown the unfolding of Cain's cursed existence. He does not simply vanish. Instead, he becomes a progenitor and a builder. But the manner of his life and the nature of his creations are forever conditioned by his foundational crime. This passage reveals what happens when the human drive to create is divorced from a proper relationship with being. The first clause describes a movement that is both geographical and metaphysical. So Cain went out from the Lord's presence. This is the physical actualization of the spiritual state he himself diagnosed. He is now hidden from the face of God. The dialogue with the Logos is over. He is cast out from the possibility of that divine conversation, thrown entirely upon his own, now corrupted resources. He is a man unplugged from the transcendent, a consciousness adrift. He settles, if such a word can be used, in the land of Nod, east of Eden. This is not mere cartography, it is a map of the soul. The name Nod is derived directly from the Hebrew verb for, to wander, lanad, and is cognate with the word for wanderer, nad, used in his curse. He literally goes to dwell in the land of wandering. His geographic location is nothing more than the external manifestation of his internal state of being. He does not escape his curse by moving, he inhabits it. His address is his affliction. Furthermore, this land is east of Eden. In the symbolic geography of Genesis, east is the direction of exile. Adam and Eve were cast out of the garden, and the cherubim with the flaming sword were placed at the east gate to block their return. To go east of Eden is to move even further away from the memory of paradise, deeper into the realm of the fallen, further from the divine origin point. Cain's journey is a continual movement away from the good. In this land of anxious wandering, a land defined by his alienation, what does Cain do? The narrative tells us two things: he reproduces and he builds. He takes a wife, and she bears a son, Enoch. The line of the first murderer is not extinguished. Life, in its terrible, tenacious indifference, continues. The problem of evil is not contained, it is now woven into the fabric of future generations. But it is his second act that contains the key to his psychology. Cain was then building a city. We must pause to consider the staggering audacity and defiance of this act. This is the man who was explicitly cursed to be a Navinad, a restless wanderer. And what is his response to this sentence of perpetual motion and homelessness? He builds a city. A city is the absolute antithesis of wandering. A city has walls, foundations, structures, a fixed location. A city is a bulwark against chaos. It is an act of imposing a man-made order on the face of the earth. This is Cain's ultimate rebellion. Having been rejected by the divine order, God, and the natural order, the soil that will not yield its fruit for him, he decides to construct his own alternative order. The city is Cain's attempt to create a reality that will answer to him alone. It is a fortress built not just against the wild beasts of the wilderness, but against the terror of his own existential homelessness. It is a monument to his refusal to accept his fate. If he cannot find a home within the cosmos as it is structured, he will build an artificial home, a man-made womb, and seal himself inside its walls. This presents a terrifyingly pessimistic archetypal account of the origins of civilization. The first city, the text suggests, was not founded in hope or as an act of noble co-creation with God. It was founded by the first murderer, in a spirit of defiance, as a fortress against the consequences of his own evil. It suggests that civilization, at its root, contains a pathological element, that it is a structure built out of fear, alienation, and a desire to hide from the judgment of both God and nature. Our walls keep the chaos out. But they are also the walls of a prison we have built for our own fallen souls. And he names this city after his son, Enoch, Chanuk. The name, derived from the Hebrew root for, to dedicate or to initiate, is profoundly telling. Cain dedicates this new, artificial world to his lineage. He is attempting to initiate a new history, a new reality founded on his own terms. The city is his legacy, a self-created bubble of order and meaning in a cosmos he perceives as hostile, a reality he dedicates to the perpetuation of his own alienated line. It is an act of tragic and monumental hubris. To Enoch was born Irad, and Irad was the father of Mehujael, and Mehujael was the father of Methuselah, and Methuselah was the father of Lamech. Lamech married two women, one named Adah and the other Zillah. Adah gave birth to Jabal. He was the father of those who live in tents and raise livestock. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all who play stringed instruments and pipes. Zillah also had a son, Tubal-Cain, who forged all kinds of tools out of bronze and iron. Tubal-Cain's sister was Naamah. This passage charts the development of the civilization of Cain. It is a story of explosive technological and cultural innovation. It is the story of humanity turning its formidable creative intelligence away from the transcendent and towards the immanent, with spectacular and terrifying results. This is what happens in the city built as a fortress against God. Humanity becomes incredibly powerful, incredibly sophisticated, and incredibly dangerous. The genealogy from Enoch to Lamech signifies the passage of time, the consolidation of the Cainite way of life within the walls of the city. After several generations, this lineage culminates in the figure of Lamech, who represents the full flowering of his ancestor Cain's resentful and arrogant spirit. The first thing we are told about Lamech is that he married two women, one named Adah and the other Zillah. This is not a trivial detail. It is the first recorded instance of polygamy in the biblical narrative. It is a profound transgression. The archetypal pattern established in Eden was one man and one woman, a union of complementary halves. Lamech shatters this pattern. His taking of two wives is an act of appetite, of acquisition, of sensual and social dominance. It signifies a departure from the established divine order in the most fundamental of social structures, the family. If Cain was the first murderer, Lamech is the first to corrupt the institution of marriage for the sake of his own pride and desire. He is a more powerful, more socially dominant, and more arrogant version of Cain. The sin is not being diluted through the generations, it is being concentrated and magnified. From this transgressive union spring the progenitors of human industry and art. From his first wife, Adah, whose name can mean adornment, come two sons who master two crucial domains. The first is Jabal, who was the father of those who live in tents and raise livestock. This is a monumental leap. It represents the development of large-scale, systematic animal husbandry. This is not the simple, faithful shepherdhood of Abel. This is the industrialization of the nomadic life. It is the Cainite spirit, the spirit of control and systematization, co-opting and mastering the very profession of the murdered brother. It is a sign of immense economic power and control over the natural world. The second son is Jubal, the father of all who play stringed instruments and pipes. Here we have the birth of high art, of sophisticated culture. The city of Cain is not a grim, utilitarian dystopia. It is filled with music. It has beauty. It has the means to stir the soul and provide aesthetic pleasure. This demonstrates a crucial and ambivalent truth. Art and culture are not inherently righteous. They are forms of power. In a society properly oriented towards the good, art can be a vehicle for expressing the divine. But in the city of Cain, divorced from the logos, art can become a decadent distraction, a sensual indulgence to drown out the silence of a meaningless cosmos, a beautiful veneer to mask a rotten core. From his second wife, Zillah, whose name can mean shadow or protection, comes the culmination of Cainite technological prowess. Her son is Tubal-Cain, the one who forged all kinds of tools out of bronze and iron. This is the dawn of metallurgy, the single greatest leap in technological power in the ancient world. With metal, one can create stronger plows, more durable buildings, and, most ominously, far deadlier weapons. The name itself is a neon sign of symbolic significance. He not only shares a name with his ancestor, Cain, the original forger and acquirer, but doubles down on it. Tubal may also connote artisanship. He is the master craftsman of the Cainite spirit. In him, the abstract desire to get and forge is actualized in the most potent material possible. He is the father of the forge, the factory, and the sword. The text then adds, almost as an afterthought, Tubal-Cain's sister was Naamah. Her name means pleasant, lovely, or gracious. Like the art of her cousin Jubal, she represents the sophisticated and beautiful face of this civilization. She is the adornment, the pleasantness that this powerful, technologically advanced society can produce. Yet, her inclusion is enigmatic. Rabbinic traditions often associate her with the seductive dangers of a sophisticated but godless culture. She is the beautiful face that can hide the violent heart of her brother, the forger of weapons. She represents the possibility that the ultimate product of the city of Cain is a seductive but soul-destroying materialism. In these few verses, we see the full portrait of the city of man when left to its own devices. It is a spectacular worldly success. It has developed advanced economics, Jabal, high art, Jubal, and overwhelming technological power, Tubal-Cain. It is sophisticated and beautiful, Naamah. It has mastered the world. But it is all built upon a foundation of murder, arrogance, and alienation from God. The final verses of this section, Lamech's terrible Song of the Sword, will reveal the true spirit that animates this glittering, godless machine. Lamech said to his wives, Adah and Zillah, listen to me, wives of Lamech, hear my words. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for injuring me. If Cain is avenged 7 times, then Lamech 77 times. This is not a mere snippet of conversation. This is a formal poetic declaration, a song of the sword, as it has come to be known. It is a boast, a threat, and a manifesto. It is the anthem of a civilization that has become powerful enough to believe it is its own God. To understand this poem is to understand the endpoint of a humanity that has severed its ties to the transcendent and placed its faith entirely in the power forged by its own hands. The poem opens with a demand for attention. Lamech said to his wives, Adah and Zillah, "Listen to me, wives of Lamech, hear my words." The structure is a formal, public address. He summons his wives, the mothers of his powerful children, the foundational figures of his household, to serve as the audience for his proclamation. The repetition, "Listen to me, hear my words," is the voice of absolute patriarchal dominance, the voice of a tyrant demanding that his world bear witness to his glory. There is no dialogue here, only a declamation. He is not seeking counsel, he is issuing a statement of his own terrifying significance. The body of the boast is a chilling confession of violence. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for injuring me. This must be contrasted sharply with his ancestor Cain's crime to appreciate the full extent of the moral decay. Cain murdered Abel out of metaphysical envy, out of resentment against the ideal. It was a profound, soul-shattering event that left him terrified of the consequences. Lamech, however, kills for an infinitely more trivial reason: wound, an injury, a personal slight. The value of a human life has, in 7 generations, degraded to the point where it is worth less than the momentary physical discomfort or wounded pride of a powerful man. This is the ultimate expression of narcissistic rage. Lamech's internal state is so fragile and his ego so inflated that any challenge, however minor, is met with absolute annihilation. There is no fear here. There is no remorse. There is only the proud, public declaration that he has taken the ultimate transgression, murder, and has transformed it into a casual expression of his personal power. He is boasting about his utter lack of impulse control and presenting it as a virtue. The poem's horrifying climax is its final line, a direct and monstrous perversion of the divine protection granted to Cain. If Cain is avenged 7 times, then Lamech 77 times. This is the key. Lamech has taken the paradoxical decree of God, an act designed to limit the cycle of vengeance and subordinate human retribution to a higher law, and has twisted it into a personal motto of unlimited violence. God's protection of Cain was a strange and terrible act of mercy, a way of saying, "Vengeance is mine." Lamech looks at this and declares, "Vengeance is mine, and my version is 10 times more terrible than God's." It is an act of utter, breathtaking hubris. He is not merely breaking God's law, he is usurping it, magnifying it, and claiming it as his own terrible prerogative. He is explicitly declaring himself to be the source of ultimate justice and retribution. And how can he make such a claim? What underwrites this monstrous boast? The answer lies with his son, Tubal Cain, the forger of bronze and iron. Lamech's Song of the Sword is made possible by the literal sword. His confidence is not in divine protection, but in technological superiority. He is the first tyrant to understand that advanced weaponry makes a new kind of politics possible. His boast is the boast of a man who knows he possesses the deadlier weapon. This is the terrifying marriage of technological power to moral depravity. The great creative potential of the Cainite civilization, the art of Jubal, the industry of Jabal, the metallurgy of Tubal Cain, finds its ultimate meaning and purpose in serving the murderous pride of the tyrant, Lamech. The pronouncement of 77 times vengeance is the philosophy of terror. It is a declaration of disproportionate retribution. If you harm me in any small way, I will not seek parity. I will seek your absolute annihilation. I will wipe you, your family, and your memory from the face of the earth. It is the logic of the vendetta, the terrorist, and the rogue state, a logic made possible by the power that technology provides. In Lamech, the Cainite experiment reaches its dead end. The city built to defy God has produced a man who believes he has surpassed him. The civilization founded on a resentful murder has culminated in a culture that openly glorifies unlimited, technologically enabled violence. The narrative has painted a picture of a world so saturated with hubris and bloodlust that it cannot be allowed to stand. The stage is now perfectly set for a judgment on a global scale, the cataclysm of the flood, which will be required to wash away the stain of a humanity that has so thoroughly corrupted itself. Adam made love to his wife again, and she gave birth to a son and named him Seth, saying, God has granted me another child in place of Abel, since Cain killed him. Seth also had a son, and he named him Enosh. At that time people began to call on the name of the Lord. After the terrible crescendo of Lamech's boast, the narrative returns to the primordial couple, Adam and Eve. It returns to the very act that began this chapter, the act of procreation. But everything has changed. The first birth was fraught with the ambiguity of pride and acquisition. This birth, occurring in the shadow of the murder of one son and the monstrous development of the other, is an act of profound and sober hope. The text says, Adam made love to his wife again, using the same verb, yada, to know. This is a knowing, however, that is now burdened with the full, tragic knowledge of what human beings are capable of. It is an act of faith against the evidence, a decision to bring new life into a world that has already proven itself to be a stage for fratricide. And from this act, a third son is born. It is Eve's naming of this son that reveals the complete transformation of her spirit. She names him Seth, Shet, and she explains why God has granted me another child in place of Abel. The name Seth is derived directly from the Hebrew verb shat, which means has granted, has appointed, or has placed. This is not the language of acquisition. It is the language of grace. Contrast this with the birth of her firstborn. Of Cain, she declared, I have gotten, Canody, a man, a statement brimming with the pride of personal creation and possession. The hubris is now gone, burned away by the tragedy of her sons. She does not claim Seth as her own achievement. She recognizes him as a gift, as a divinely appointed replacement. She has moved from a posture of arrogant getting to one of humble receiving. This is a spiritual maturation of immense significance. Furthermore, she explicitly frames this birth in the context of the tragedy, in place of Abel, since Cain killed him. The new beginning does not erase the past. It is not an act of forgetting, it is a direct response to the horror. The memory of the murdered ideal, Abel, is the soil in which this new, fragile hope is planted. Seth's entire identity is predicated on the crime and the loss. He is the appointed seed, tasked with carrying forward the potential that was extinguished when Cain rose up against his brother. The line of hope continues, but its character is the polar opposite of the Cainite lineage. Seth also had a son, and he named him Enosh. If the Cainites produced founders of industries and arts, the first contribution of the Sethite line is simply another man, and the name they give him is profoundly humble. The name Enosh is a Hebrew word for a man, but it is a word that carries the strong connotation of man in his frailty, his mortality, his weakness. This is the antidote to the hubris of Lamech. The line of Seth is founded not on a boast of strength, but on a clear-eyed recognition of human finitude and frailty. Where the Cainites saw themselves as gods, the Sethites understand themselves to be Enosh, mortal men, dust and breath, in desperate need of help from a source beyond themselves. It is from this posture of humility, this acceptance of their own creaturely limits, that a new possibility can emerge. The chapter, and the story of the two lines, culminates in one of the most hopeful sentences in all of Genesis. At that time people began to call on the name of the Lord. This is the ultimate counterpoint to the Song of the Sword. Lamech's poem was a proclamation of his own name, his own power, his own vengeance. The activity that defines the line of Seth is the act of calling on the name of the Lord. It is a complete and total reversal of spiritual orientation. It is the turning away from the worship of the self and the turning back toward the worship of the transcendent. It signifies the beginning of prayer, of communal worship, of the public and voluntary subordination of the human will to a divine principle. The civilization of Cain, for all its technological and artistic brilliance, was spiritually silent. Its music may have been a way to fill the void left by the absence of God. The civilization of Seth, founded in humility and in awareness of human frailty, is the one that rediscovers the language of worship. They do not build great cities or forge weapons of iron. They learn to pray. Here, the narrative presents humanity with its two eternal paths. There is the path of Cain, a spectacular rebellion against the structure of being, leading to technological mastery, sophisticated culture, and, ultimately, a nihilistic and murderous pride that consumes itself. And there is the path of Seth, a fragile, humble new beginning, born of tragedy, predicated on the acceptance of human weakness, which leads not to worldly power, but to the rediscovery of a relationship with the transcendent. It is this thin, quiet, purple thread of the line of Seth that the biblical narrative will follow through the flood and beyond, for it is the only path that offers an alternative to the dead end of the city of man.